Good day, fish tankers. Shout out to my friends Keith and Janet who made me this fantastic t-shirt. In fact, a couple of these t-shirts that can add to this channel. Thanks Janet and Keith. But today we're going to talk about aquatic wet pets. I'm not talking about the cat falling into the aquarium. I'm talking of that kind of fish that can be sometimes part of a community of fish, but it's the centerpiece fish, the one that stands out. Often they're fish that need to be kept on their own. But it's a fish that's got its own temperament, its own sort of personality, if you will, that comes to the glass when you are there and can often sort of be specifically fed by hand almost. That sort of fish that becomes sort of a pet more than just another fish in the aquarium. Now, if you have an idea of what your favorite aquatic wet pet is, I've got some ideas too of fish that I've kept in the past or might want to keep in the future. So if you're interested in wet pets, stick around. I'm going to start with the smaller ones first. So let's start with something that everybody almost has kept at one stage of or another, and that's a very popular betta or Siamese fighting fish like we call them here. They have vastly different temperaments. Some are quite chill and some are super aggressive and need to be kept on their own. I find the very red ones tend to be the most aggressive, but it's a fish that doesn't need a huge aquarium. And they've got that cichlid personality. You know, they come up to the tank when you're there at feeding time and you can sort of feed them from a tweezer or just drop pellet by pellet. And they certainly have a lot of character and they like to display it, their own reflection or sometimes even your finger. Now tell me in the comment section, is it just me, or since I've started keeping them again about 6 years ago, they're not nearly as tough as they used to be back in my youth in the 90s. It's not a very long-lived fish anyway, but I used to get 2-3 years out of a betta, perhaps even a little bit more. Now these days I battle, you know, there was only one that I could get past 1 year. I battle, I don't find them to be long-lived anymore. No matter what you do, you know, I've lost a couple from jumping out and I had lids on the aquarium. I go through the smallest gap, that gap that I usually leave for the electrical cords and the airline tubing. But now I've cut the glass lids to such a way that it's really only the tiniest little spots that only the tubing and the cord for the heater can go in. So far so good. But they are escape artists anyway, they've always have been. But these days I also find they eventually, even no matter how careful you feed them, with what you feed them, many of them, they eventually become bloated, they develop digestive problems, and that then goes into dropsy. I've been able to cure some with an Epsom salt bath, but they tend to get digestive problems, and you've got to be really careful with that. And I think it's best that you stick to a specific betta food and maybe some frozen food, and be very careful not to overfeed, because if there's other fish in the aquarium, I've had that problem. They maybe eat a little too much, they get constipated, they get dropsy, they die. I've had that quite a bit with bettas these days. So, I don't know. Whether betta is still my favorite wet pet, but I think it is still a very nice option to consider. I think the trick would just be to get good stock from the beginning. Then sticking with a small fish, who has kept a scarlet baddis? That's a tiny little nano fish that you can put on its own there in a 5-gallon tank. It can be part of a community as well. It's a little predator, and it's once they get settled into a well-planted tank, it's always fascinating to see them go about. They're almost betta-like in the way they hunt for small critters. Drawback though is you've got to culture live food for these fish. Some get them onto, I've heard some of them taking vibra bites or getting onto frozen food, but a fish that you have to supply constant live food for can be a bit of a pain in the what's his name. Another small nano fish will be a pea puffer. Now pea puffers, I have some of them, and I think they may also make a very nice wet pet. They're full of character. And then of course, if you don't want something that's quite so tiny, well, then you'll need a bigger tank, a more substantial tank, you know, probably a 55-gallon or more. A bigger version of it that I've had in the past that I think is also a nice wet pet is the green spotted puffer. I think they also quite nice, but you must do your research first. They require brackish water. Thing with all puffers is they are not going to eat dried foods. They will require snails, they will require, most of them will take frozen food. But the bigger ones, the pea puffers, don't really require it. But the bigger ones, you'll need an endless supply of snails so that they can wear down their beaks. So if you're going to have a green spotted puffer, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to have a supply of snails. So that's the drawback, especially also that puffers are not community fish. And then the green, some of them are brackish water as well. So there's an extra element onto it there. Sticking with brackish water, who has tried mudskippers? I don't think they really have an interaction towards you as owner that much. It's just that they are sort of a talking point because the aquariums need to be paludariums where it's sort of half out of water, half in water, and it's definitely something unusual. Perhaps they more fall under in the oddball category. Then another popular wet pet, of course, are flower horns. Now let me know once again, are you for flower horns or are you against them? Now of course it's a hybrid cichlid, and they've been line bred so that the nuchal hump, that's that fatty lump on front on a male's forehead that you get in many cichlids. It sort of it displays dominance, and it display and shows prospective females that the male is healthy. But of course they've been line bred to accentuate that nuchal hump. Do you think it's too much? Don't you? Flower horns, of course, that's definitely something that needs to be kept on its own. It's going to need for a single flower horn at least a 55-gallon tank or bigger. And the other thing about flower horns is they like warm water. You know, they want 28, 29 degrees, like discus temperature. That's when they do well. And heating up a big aquarium can also jack up your electricity bill in the winter. So that's something to consider. Keeping with fish that are hybrids and that are line bred, another fish that can be a nice wet pet is a red parrot. And they of course will also need a 55-gallon tank at least for a single specimen. And if you don't have a tank that big, the polar parrot is a similar sort of fish, also a hybrid that's got that shortened body and the funny looking dorky head, and that also can make a good wet pet. Some people love them, some people hate them. Also a line bred hybrid fish that you won't find in nature. Sticking to that theme, what about fancy goldfish? I've had them in the past. I find them quite personable. They're not as smart intelligence-wise, if you can call it that, as cichlids or even a betta. They are a bit derpy, but fancy goldfish can make a very entertaining wet pet. They do have a lot of character, but of course, once again, bigger tank, 55-gallon. Plus is you don't really need a heater unless you're in a very cold area and your house gets really cold. But goldfish can make a nice wet pet, and keep more than one. I would say keep two at least, because I found if you have a single goldfish, they sit there and mope in the corner. They do like to have a bit of company of their own. So keep two, maybe three. And those are fancy goldfish. That's also a nice wet pet. Now you guys must of course tell me in the comments what is your favorite wet pet that you've kept or what you would like to keep. But my favorite is always it's still my favorite, and I would love to keep them again, and that's Oscars. Now obviously they're a big fish. I think it's about the maximum size of fish that I'd be comfortable keeping. I'm not a monster fish guy. I just don't have a space for that. Can't find the space where I am now for an Oscar tank. But you need to put them in a really big tank. I would say 1.5 meters by 60 by 60 would be the sweet spot. I would even go a bit larger than that if I have to keep them again. And actually, if you have a tank size and you have a big filter, a proper canister filter or a couple of hang-on backs, then Oscars are actually quite straightforward and easy to keep. And I don't think you can beat them for personality. Some are more aggressive than others, but I have never found an Oscar to be the most aggressive cichlid. I found many cichlids that were more aggressive than Oscars, even angels for that matter. Well, those are my thoughts on wet pets, just a couple off the top of my mind. So tell me, what is your favorite wet pet? And then until we see each other again, keep on taking good care of those domestic denizens of the deep.